So we dated for about 3 years before we got engaged. And like to me, I think that's like a totally normal span of time. Because we were what when we got engaged? 27. How old was I?
That's the question.
Shut up. 27, I think I was.
I was 28.
So you were 28. I was 27. And so to me, I felt like that wasn't a terribly long period of time, but like we also like are active in church and there's a lot of married couples. And so I kind of felt like there were moments when people would say things like, why are you guys not engaged yet? I'm like, but I don't know him. Like, know him. And it's like, I feel like there's this expectation sometimes, especially like within church communities, that people will get engaged quickly. Which, you know, to each his own. I don't feel like there's a specified length of time of when that should happen. But like for me, I think like the 3 years that we did date and get to know each other before getting engaged was like perfectly appropriate. But like I've also heard like people say like, oh, if after 2 years the guy doesn't propose, you need to leave him because he's not serious, da 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 da. And I'm just like, I mean, I guess, and maybe the perspective, if I'm like 45 and I've been dating somebody like another grown man, like 47, 48-year-old man. Like, we not getting no younger, sir. I don't have 6 years to be playing these games with you. I completely get that. But I don't know. I feel like as a mid-20s thing, I don't necessarily feel like I think there's a timeline that needs to be like, oh, you have to get engaged in 2 years or whatever. Because I kind of feel like at that point in your life, you're still figuring out a lot of things in terms of like your education, your career, like what you're doing with yourself. Like, so I think that there's a lot of growing that you're doing as a person, like in your mid-20s, late 20s. And so I think to say that you must be sticking hard and fast to that 2-year timeline or whatever is a little unrealistic. What do you think?
I think that anybody who gives a timeline about when other people should get engaged they're asking the wrong questions.
Okay.
I think that is what the problem is. I think people are always trying to cut and dry these certain things for them to make sense for them. So what do I mean? I think what's important first is the bigger question is, when do you talk about marriage in your relationship? It's a more important question. Because once we figure out when you talk about marriage and that conversation happens, then you both should kind of fill out, you should get engaged when you feel both comfortable in what you're going.
Right.
The problem a lot of people have is they don't know if each person even wants to get married in the first place. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to figure that out in the process, and that kind of prolongs it. Because if one person is not interested in getting married, then there is no length of time that matters.
Right.
If the person would like to get married, now where do we have? Now we have to have discussion about where do we have to be in terms of that. Now each person has their own views about it. Maybe that conversation might not happen about where you want to be.
Right.
But you talk to yourself about what do you want yourself to be for to get there. Right. And that conversation should be had once you figure it out yourself. Right. From there. So if you say, I want to be making sure I make this much certain amount of money, or I want to be living in this certain place, that should be there. If you want, you also have a certain dynamic. If you don't feel like that dynamic is there yet, sometimes that might be a reason why someone doesn't get engaged yet. Like they don't feel like they're close enough. Right. And when it gets to that point, I understand why people put a time frame. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if I don't feel as if that we're ready to be married yet, because I don't feel like we're in the place, certain things aren't ironed out yet, but you feel like you're ready to get married, that's where I think the disconnect and timing becomes a part of it. Because some of the things like, oh, you just prolong. You're like, no, I think that this needs to get fixed. Right. Now, from that point on, what are you doing to fix that issue? Right, right. And I think it's a greater red flag to me when
one person thinks there's something that needs to be fixed and the other person thinks everything is fine.
Correct.